Good afternoon, everybody. I'd like to extend a warm welcome to you all, and thank you to the participants for taking time to connect with us today. By way of introduction, I am Joanna Fraser and a partner in our Court of Protection Department. I'd also like to introduce our panellists for today, Michaela Morris and Omar Schefter, who I'll be handing over to shortly to take today's seminar. Just a couple of housekeeping points. Thank you to those who have already submitted questions. You can submit additional questions throughout the session via the Q&A function on your screen, and we will answer them at the end of today's session. When submitting questions, if you could kindly include your name and email address, so that if we don't get to your question, we can respond directly to you post the event. We will also be recording this virtual event, and this will be sent out afterwards, and towards the end of the session we will be posting a feedback link, so please take just 2 minutes to let us know your feedback. So I will now hand over to my colleague Michaela to begin today's session.
Thanks, Jo. Good morning, good afternoon, everyone. I'd love to be able to say good to see you, but it's just good to know you're out there. Hope you're all doing well a year on from the first lockdown. So my role at Owen Mitchell is I'm a client liaison manager. I'm an occupational therapist by background, and I've got experience in rehabilitation, mental health and palliative care. We're really fortunate as a firm to have 10 client liaison managers around the country, and our role is to support clients and their families in the early stages of an injury, a delayed diagnosis, a birth trauma, whatever it may be, to access services. Obviously, it's a very vulnerable time for people, so enabling them to access rehab, mental health support, benefits, all those sorts of things are really important. Very aware that Omar and I will be rushing through the benefits in this short time, so as Jo said, there are questions later, and forgive us for the pace. Over to you, Omar.
Good afternoon, everybody. I'm Omar Schefter, Senior Welfare Advisor at Owen Mitchell. I lead the Welfare Benefits Service. We cover the entire country. Just a brief overview of some of the things that we can assist with. So we deal with every stage of the benefits process. So that begins with completion of forms, attending assessments and preparation for that, mandatory reconsideration requests, appeals to the tribunal, appeals to the upper tribunal. We also conduct benefit entitlement reviews for people and also offer general advice and guidance. I'll now pass you back over to Michaela to go into a bit more detail.
Thank you. So this is what we'll be covering in our whistle-stop benefits tour this morning. We'll be looking at disability living allowance, or DLA, for children, personal independence, PIP, carers allowance, universal credit, and then look at other benefits and concessions that you might be eligible for, and then time for questions at the end. Thanks, Natasha. So starting with disability living allowance, this is for children from the age of 3 to the age of 16. There are two basic parts that are assessed and is what the information given provides the person who's assessing you to make their decision. So two components, care and mobility, and there are 3 rates for care, so 3 rates of benefit that you will receive for either low, middle or high, and then there are 2 rates for mobility, low and high. I should just say that in terms of DLA, as I say, it's age 3 or upwards, but the mobility component, unless your child has no mobility at all, the mobility component can't be assessed until they are 5, so that is worth remembering. There's also an application for the DLA under what we call special rules, where the child has a life-limiting illness or they're undergoing renal dialysis. Those are special rules, and it goes through much more quickly. Next slide, please. So those are the current rates awarded for DLA. as I say, the care component, low, middle and high, and the mobility component, low and high, and that's the weekly amount. Thank you. So tips on applying. Firstly, take a big deep breath and have a strong cup of tea or something stronger and some chocolate biscuits. It's a 41-page document. It takes a lot of energy and time to fill in. And jumping to that last point, the impact on you. If you're a parent, a grandparent, a full-time carer, a relative, writing the DLA form for your child or the child you look after, it's tough because you're being reminded in 3D Technicolor of what your child can't do compared to a child of a similar age. So it actually can be quite tough because it's focusing on the my child can't, rather than what my child can do, what my child wants to do, what their zest for life is about. It's not. It's very much about where they need extra help. So it can be quite tough to do. So just bear that in mind for the first time you're doing it. Also, before you do it, I would spend considerable time in the few weeks leading up to doing the form in keeping a diary, because within the form there are real specifics like how long does it take to wash your child, get your child dressed, how many times during the night do you have to help them settle, how long does that take. Now we could all guess that 3 minutes, 5 minutes, 10 minutes, but by keeping a diary you can get an average, but also you might be surprised at how long it does take, or that it doesn't take as long as you thought. So they will be asking you those things. So keeping a diary of their sleep patterns, how long things take, if they have behavioural difficulties, how long that period where they are resisting getting dressed or whatever it is about. So really important to keep a diary. Also, please keep a copy of the form you filled in before you send it off. Amazingly, they do lose those forms, and also if you are going to a mandatory reconsideration or a tribunal, it's really stressful if you cannot remember or you don't have a record of what you put on the original form. So do keep a spare copy. As much evidence as possible. Things like has an appointment with isn't enough. It needs information from therapists, from consultants, from any input with social services. So evidence to back up what you're saying is really important. So don't expect to do it in one go. The devil is in the detail. That applies for PIP, that applies for tenants allowance, carers allowance, all of them. But yeah, really important. And because it is draining, it's very easy to hurry and think, oh, that'll do. But actually putting that time in at the beginning is really, really important. Thank you. So the areas that are scored, as I mentioned, mobility. This includes functional limitations, so obviously any equipment that your child needs to assist them in their mobility, but it's also looking at the impact of mobilizing. So is there a risk of spasm, risk of falls, impact of pain and fatigue? All those things you're bringing across the variability. So your child might have good days and bad days, and it's really important to bring that across. Also in mobility, which is different to some of the other benefits, it's also looking at how the visual or hearing impairment affects the mobility. So it's not just the physical act of walking. So yes, again, really important that you put that in. If there is an element of risk with your child in terms of impulsive behaviour or lack of a sense of understanding of danger, really important to bring that out. Some parents find it really helpful to give an example, you know, because if you write risk of danger, that could mean a whole raft of things. For example, at traffic lights, the child does not understand the change of traffic lights or respond to the noise of the beeping when the lights change. So actually giving examples can be really helpful. Thank you. So the care component, these are the elements that they assess and that you're asked to write about. I think it can be very hard standing back from your child and thinking, actually, what care do they need? What is it that I'm doing for them because it's quicker or because it's less of a battle? and what is it that they actually need. Sometimes it can be quite helpful if you have a child who doesn't have additional needs and comparing what they were able to do at that age. I think when you're applying when your child is 3 or 4, this is quite difficult, but it's again being as clear as you can and reminding them, and it doesn't hurt to repeat yourself, reminding them why they need help, because of weakness in their left side, because of the cerebral palsy affecting the strength in their right leg, whatever it may be. So really important not just to say they can't do X. Well, why can't they? What's the difficulty? Why does it take them a bit longer? Why do you need to be there to supervise? And that is the case for all of those things. And also you might, as a parent, very naturally problem solve and find different ways of doing things to help that child. But put those in, because that's you providing more than you would for a child without additional needs of that age. Okay, and then there are more elements to the care component on the next slide, please, Natasha. So again, covers difficulty with hearing. The speaking and communication, that's really important because it's not simply about the words, it's also about the interaction, whether there's a fear, whether there's a risk of your child because of their behavioural difficulties that puts the other person, say a child of a similar age, in danger. Blackouts, fits and seizures, obviously the type of blackout, fit and seizure, and also the duration and the frequency, really important. You know, my child has seizures, isn't enough. How often, how long do they last? And also bearing in mind that many children and adults following a seizure will have a period of cognitive difficulty or extreme tiredness, etc. So it's really important to talk about sort of post-seizure as well. Okay, so with the last one there, any help your child needs at night. This is really important, particularly if you're hoping and expecting, because of their level of disability, to get the higher rate, that they do need to have some help at night. Obviously, most children under 5 will need some help at night because of a bad dream or, you know, not getting to the loo in time. It's about the frequency. Again, do they need repeated help at night for a certain period related to their condition or their disability? Thank you. Moving swiftly on. So we're just looking at the eligibility of the low, the middle and the high rate. The low rate, actually, the eligibility is quite low. So they need attention with functions for at least an hour a day. And again, this is in addition to what would be expected of a child of that age without additional needs. So it is absolutely, you're specifying the extra time that you need with your child in those different areas. So middle rate, not surprisingly, they need more time in terms of those components, but also there's that supervision element. So they're not able to be left to do some of the things that you would expect, and also that they need attention at night. It isn't essential they need attention at night for the middle rate, but they do have to have considerably more time during the day that they need help. Obviously, if they are at nursery or at preschool or at playgroup or at school and they need additional help and that has been assessed by the school and is being provided, put that down as evidence, really important. And I should say that in the application they do ask for a statement from someone who knows your child well, who isn't in the home. So it might be a physiotherapist, a childminder, consultant, whoever. And obviously, again, you're asking them to bring out their functional needs. Okay. And then onto the higher rate, which obviously there is a much higher threshold of care needs for them, both in terms of care, but also it needs to combine, you know, with the high rate of mobility as well, although they are obviously scored separately. But as you can see there, they need care at night, as well as meeting the middle rate eligibility for the care components during the day. High rate, if they have a life-limiting illness, they, as I said earlier, go quickly through with under special rules. Okay, so looking at the mobility, this is an interesting one because, again, as I say, if they're between 3 and 5, even if they have difficulty with walking, or they're a slower pace, or they need to wear splints, they're not eligible till they're 5 for the low rate. The low rate doesn't exist between 3 and 5. It's only at 5 that that kicks in. So this is for children over 5, and you can see there more guidance, more supervision, and also not able to keep up with other children. It's interesting, this needs supervision with unfamiliar routes. Well, obviously you wouldn't expect a child of 5 to know the route, but I think, you know, they are getting to the stage where they, you know, will quickly tell you, Mummy, we're going down the wrong road on the way to school. But it's obviously much more than that that they need for the low rate. For the high rate, however, moving on, thank you. It's showing being unable to walk, being virtually unable to walk. So that is for the majority of the time needing aids or needing the use of a wheelchair. But also it's looking at the exertion and the fatigue related to walking. So if actually they are physically able to walk, but due to a heart condition or another condition, they cannot sustain that for any significant period. All right, and then as I said earlier, it does mention visual and hearing impairment that would affect their safety outdoors and therefore needing either aids, assistance or supervision. All right, thank you. One more on DLA. So obviously, and this would be similar for most of the benefits that we are talking about. Obviously, application is the first stage. You can get the application form direct from the DWP. Make sure you've got your NHS number or your NI, National Insurance number, with you when you apply. So that doesn't apply to children, but you just have those details with you when you ring to say, could I have an application form? You can also apply online. Then there's the assessment and decision from your form. For many benefits, that will be a face-to-face assessment. Obviously not at the moment, and in a way that's to many people's advantage, but it also reminds us how important the quality of the application form is. So having that extra evidence, having examples, and reading it, you know, look at it and think, well, if Omar was reading this, would he really understand what my child can or can't do? Because if he couldn't, because it's not clear, you know your child well, the assessor doesn't, so you need to really give them a full picture. Then if you're not happy with the decision, the initial sort of response can be a mandatory reconsideration. You can do this down the telephone. I would always recommend doing it in writing or on the form that they provide on the internet, because then you've got, you know, you're less flustered, you can remember what you said, and you can then respond to the areas that they are saying they are not eligible. Then if that isn't successful, it's going on to tribunal and a hearing. And again, that does apply to other benefits. Moving on, please. So when your child reaches 16, they will be appropriately transitioning to PIP, Personal Independence Payment. This can be difficult for many because it's assessing in a very different way. This is more about function rather than condition and rather than the care. It's about what you are able to do, what you would be able to do with equipment or aids, and what you are not able to do and you need either help or supervision. So it's kind of a different way of thinking. With the DLA and PIP, they do give you guidance notes in filling them in. Really important to use those to help. There are two components again, mobility and then daily living activities. So again, it's more about activities rather than care. The mobility element has two parts: planning and following journeys. So it's about being able to find your way around, being able to use public transport in terms of the cognitive processes. So this isn't about the ability to walk, it's about the planning and following journeys, and then the other one is about moving around. Thank you. The daily living activities that are assessed are the following there. It can be hard when you're transitioning because obviously preparing food, many 16-year-olds might be able to cook a meal, but they haven't done so. But for the purpose of PIP, it's would you be able to? So would you be able to read and understand a recipe? Would you be able to safely lift a saucepan? Would you be able to cook a simple meal? It's not talking, you know, Master Chef, it's talking about a simple meal. And that's also about, you know, would you need any equipment to help, whether it be a perching stool, a talking microwave, whatever it is. Take nutrition, beautifully spelt, I might say. I hope you're all still awake and you've spotted that. It's about food intake and whether you need any help, special cutlery, obviously if you're using a peg or a rig, and getting nutrition that way, that would be part of that. And so on. In the managing therapy, it's not simply about medication, it's also about physiotherapy, if that's something that you need to do at home, for example, for a child with cystic fibrosis. Washing and bathing and all the rest, I think, are quite explanatory. There is a big difference in PIP, though, on the communicating verbally is about speech and about being able to form words, being able to express yourselves. It's not about the social interaction. That comes under the engaging with other people. So it's really important to see what they're asking and not to go off on a tangent, because that actually won't help, and it's keeping it clear. But again, frequency, variability, good days and bad days, and if the majority are bad days, focus on the bad days. And similarly, a similar process to DLA in terms of mandatory reconsideration, etc. Next slide, please. If your child is in receipt of PIP, the daily living component, or the care component of DLA at middle or high rate, you are eligible to apply for carers allowance. However, there are some criteria for that. You need to spend at least 35 hours a week caring for them, and you can earn no more than £128 per week after taxes. So it's actually pretty low. And carers allowance itself, I think at the moment, and Omar, please tell me if I'm wrong, I think it's only about £69 a week. So it is not a huge amount, sadly. But you know, obviously still worth applying for if your child fits those and you fit those criteria. Thank you. One more. So blue badge and disabled persons bus pass. If your child is receiving the higher rate of mobility, either in DLA or PIP, you would be eligible for a blue badge. You can apply for them directly through your local authority, and they are, some will, if you're on those, they will go straight through, others will require assessment. It does vary from local authority, but it's really worth applying for, so that if your child needs to have appointments or be with you when you're shopping, and that there are difficulties both in terms of mobility but also behavioural issues, you can get nearer to the shop, nearer to the hospital. So it really can be a very, very useful thing to have. Also remember that your child may be, or adult may be, eligible for the disabled persons bus pass, and there's also one for a companion pass if they're not able to travel on their own. And again, that can be really helpful in terms of enabling them to get out and to engage with the community, and also to travel to appointments, etc. So handing over to you, Omar, and I hope that wasn't too fast and furious. Thanks.
Thanks, Michaela. Thanks, Michaela, for that informative and very interesting information regarding PIP and DLA. So I'm going to talk about everybody's least favourite benefit, universal credit. So initially looking at the eligibility criteria. So generally, universal credit is for people of a working age, so between age 18 to state pension credit age, currently 66. There are some exceptions to this. Somebody needs to have a habitually residency and a right to reside, so that's regarding the immigration status. To claim universal credit, you can't be in full-time education without some exceptions to that rule, and you need to be acceptance of the claimant commitment. I can't stress enough how important it is to be in acceptance of the claimant commitment, because without accepting that when making the claim won't start and proceed. Thanks, Leanna. So, looking at the 6 benefits that universal credit replaces, these are income-based job seekers allowance, income-related employment support allowance, income support, so all the main means tested benefits, child tax credit, working tax credit, and housing benefit. We'll also like to stress that to prevent any misconceptions, universal credit has got nothing to do with Universal Studios, so don't hold any grievances towards them. Instead, fire any complaints towards Ian Duncan Smith, who was the architect of it. Thanks, Michaela. So as I mentioned, universal credit claiming at age 16, there are some exceptions to be able to claim at this age. So firstly, you need to either have a limited capability for work or be awaiting assessment for a limited capability for work. So that's equivalent to the old ESA work capability assessment. Failing that, you need to have regular and substantial caring responsibility for a severely disabled person. So that could be an adult or a child. Be responsible for a child, or be part of a couple with responsibility for a child, and the partner meets the conditions of entitlement. You could be entitled at age 16 if you are pregnant and have less than 11 weeks until the due date, or you were pregnant and it's been less than 15 weeks since confinement, or alternatively, if you're age 16 and have no parental support. So claiming in full-time education, so the criteria for this is to have either no parental support and be undertaking non-advanced education. So what we mean by non-advanced education is not a university level course. You could claim if you're entitled to PIP or DLA and have a limited capability for work or work-related activity. Now here we have to talk about what's called the universal credit black hole. So for this, you need to be in receipt of PIP or DLA, you need to have a work capability assessment or be awaiting one. But you can't have a work capability assessment until you actually make a claim for universal credit. But you can't make a claim for universal credit without having the work capability assessment. So there's a vicious circle there. The way around this is to make a claim for new style employment support allowance on a credits only claim. You won't receive any payments in those circumstances, but you will be on the waiting list for a work capability assessment. And once that work capability assessment has been made, then you can switch to universal credit and make a claim that way. The other ways to claim in full-time education are if you're responsible for a child, part of a couple who are both in full-time education have responsibility for a child, are a single foster parent, or you are of state pension credit age, so i.e. age 66, but your partner isn't. Thank you. So the claim process for universal credit is principally done online. However, particularly in the last year following the COVID outbreak, it is now a lot easier to make a claim over the phone, and it can be done that way as well. You have 7 days to make a claim. If the claim isn't completed within 7 days, then it will be closed and you will have to start again. And again, to reiterate, you must be in acceptance of the claimant commitment for the claim to start. Thank you. So talking about the claimant commitment, there's 4 different groups that you'll be placed in, and each has their own requirements. So the no work related requirements applies for those who generally have severe disabilities, won't be expected to find work, can't do anything with a view to finding work in the future, so essentially just left alone by DWP and I'll have no existing additional requirements. The work-focused interview requirement expects people to intermittently attend the job centre to look at barriers preventing them from working and discussing how to overcome them. The work preparation group involves attending training courses with a view to finding work in the future, looking at improving CV, generally upskilling with a view to looking for work going forward. And then the all work related requirements group is you're expected to spend at least 35 hours a week doing everything possible to find work. So that's making applications, upgrading a CV, attending interviews, doing absolutely everything you would be doing to find a job. I will stress it's really important to identify at the initial stage any restrictions you have in complying with this. So if you've got childcare responsibilities, it's important you spell that out at the initial stage, because you can't do that later on and say, oh well, I can't do this now because I've got to look after my children between these hours. Spell it out at the start. Really, really important. Thank you. So when changes happen to universal credit circumstances, it's really important to mention them straight away, because as the claims are assessed on a month-by-month basis on the fixed date based on when you made the claim, changes will be considered for the full month regardless of when the notification was made. So let's say you have a child living with you who turns 17, moves out of the house. It's 2 days before the end of your assessment month and you notify DWP. That child would be treated as not living with you for the duration of that full month, so you wouldn't receive the additional child premium. However, on the flip side, if a new baby was born into your household the day before your assessment period ended, that baby would be treated as being with you for the full month, so you'd receive a full month's worth of payment. So it's really important to be aware of the assessment dates and reporting changes. Thank you. So there's a number of different elements within universal credit, and they all tie back to the benefits that they replace. So the standard allowance is equivalent to the standard allowance in, say, job seekers allowance and employment support allowance. The child element and the disabled child element are equivalent to the amounts you'd received in child tax credits. The ill or disabled adult element is the equivalent of the ESA disabled adult additional premiums. The carer element is as it sounds, for somebody who's claiming carer's allowance or has caring responsibility. The housing element is the equivalent of housing benefit, and the childcare cost element is the equivalent to childcare costs in tax credits. Thank you. So coming back to the claimant commitment, and again, this is when sanctions can be imposed. So I will reiterate once again, it's really important to notify the DWP of any restrictions right at the get-go. Failure to respond to a journal update on the universal credit claim when the online journal is updated, if you don't respond, that can be treated as non-compliance and that can result in sanctions being applied. So it's really important to check the journal once you receive a notification saying there's been an updated entry, because it might require a follow-up action from yourself, which you must complete within a reasonable time frame. Sanctions, depending on the number and level, can range from anything from 1 week right up to 3 years in the most severe cases. Sanctions don't generally seem to be applied as willy-nilly as they were at the initial start of universal credit. Now it really does take something severe for a sanction to be implied. Thank you. So moving on to other benefits and concessions that people may be entitled to. First one is council tax reduction, and this is managed by the local authority, so they have some degree of discretion as to how it's applied. Now generally there are sort of 3 ways that it can be applied. So the first one is if the property has been adapted to meet the needs of a disabled person, or you need an additional room to store equipment to meet disability needs, then what's called a disability based band reduction can be applied. So your property will be moved down a band and the appropriate reductions made in the council tax bill. The next one would be exemption or reduction based on a severe mental impairment. So if the claimant is classed as having a severe mental impairment, and this is verified by the general practitioner, they would be treated as non-resident of the property. So if they're living alone, that SMI exemption would lead to a zero council tax liability. If they live with one other adult who isn't their partner, then that other adult could claim a carer's exemption. So again, that would lead to an overall zero liability. If there's 3 adults in the property who are all not related as partners, then you may have one with a severe mental impairment exemption, one with a carer's exemption. So that property would be treated as having just one adult. So that would lead to a 25% reduction in the council tax bill. And then reductions can also be made based on low income. This would depend on the income levels as to the level of reduction made, and again, this would be assessed by the local authority. Thank you. The Warm Home Grant. For this, you apply through your energy company. The person named on their bill or their partner needs to be in receipt of a means tested benefit. So that would be universal credit, income related employment support allowance, income related job seekers allowance, or income support. Or alternatively, you're in receipt of the guaranteed credit element for pension credit. What would then happen is, once you made the application, if it's successful, a one-off payment of currently £140 would be made to the energy company, and that would be deducted from your bill at source. It is, like I said, paid directly to the energy company, and it's also treated on a first come first served basis. So each energy company generally has a limited number of applications they will accept. The window usually opens in September each year. Not all energy companies participate, but generally all the major ones do, so it's always worth checking. And then once the window opens in September, it's worth getting an application in straight away, just to make sure you don't miss out. Thank you. So the water shore tariff. So again, you'd apply via your water company. You must have a water meter as opposed to be based on the old tariff system. And again, you need to be in receipt of a certain means tested benefit, or potentially also certain elements of tax credits. To qualify, you need to have a condition, which means you need to use more water than an average household. Now, just having a disability on its own won't satisfy this condition. It needs to be specific. So a couple of examples could be if someone has eczema and they need to clean the skin more frequently, or if someone is unable to stand, so is unable to shower and so must have baths, which means you use more water. So both of those would qualify for water shore. Thank you. So finally, here are some useful contact telephone numbers for Department of Work and Pensions. As you can see, they have telephone and text phone services available. Those are the direct telephone numbers and also the opening times for the relevant hotlines. Thank you very much. I'll now hand you over to Joe.
Sorry, I had myself on mute. Thank you, Omar and Michaela, for that whistle-stop tour about all things related to benefits, which I'm sure you all will have found extremely useful and informative. I am conscious of time, but we have a couple of minutes just to do some questions. So I will just read these out, and then Michaela and Omar, if you could kindly answer. That would be extremely useful. We've already got a couple of them. The first one being, sorry, I've just lost it. Are you able to receive carer's allowance if you care for a disabled child, but you also receive personal independent payment yourself?
Shall I take that? Yes, you are, but again, as long as you meet the criteria. If there is obviously another adult in the house who is providing care for both of you, because of the dual disability allowance coming into the house, I would just ring the carer's allowance line with the DWP and just say, this is the situation, am I able to apply? And I think it's always just best to ask them straight up, but yes, you would be eligible.
Okay, thank you. There's just a couple of questions that were sent in prior to today's seminar, and I know that you've touched upon these briefly in your presentation, but just for completeness, the first one is, could you advise about universal credit when a young adult is in residential care?
Yes, I'll fill that one.
Okay.
So for universal credit, it is possible to make a claim whilst an adult is in residential care. However, it will also depend on whether the care is being funded by the local authority and state or by a private individual. So if it's being state funded and there's a financial means tested assessment done by the local authority, it may well be that elements of the universal credit will be taken into consideration, quite potentially fully, by the local authority. So whilst a claim may be possible, it may well be that no payments are actually received if they're taken into consideration as part of the means testing assessment.
Okay, thank you, Omar. And Michaela, you did touch on this at the beginning of your slides, but one of the questions we had was, my son is only 11 months old, so I'm interested in any advice as we haven't applied for any benefits as of yet.
Thanks, Jo. As I said earlier, that DLA, you're not able to apply until they are 3, and then obviously if your child has additional education as well as health care needs, then you would also be looking at an education and healthcare plan. I think obviously 11 months is too young, but it'd be worth sort of reading up on those things, and also as Jo will mention, it's probably worth joining our family support group on Facebook, which Jo will say a bit more about, because again, that's sort of how long these things take, and are there other things locally or nationally that you can get support from for your child.
Can I just add to that as well, also that it might be possible, depending on the circumstances, to claim child benefit, and potentially maybe if you've got entitlement yourself for universal credit, that might mean an additional element for the child in your universal credit claim also.
Yeah, thanks for that.
Thank you both. So that concludes today's seminar. So thank you very much for joining us. The session has been recorded, so a link will be sent out shortly, and you will also receive the feedback link. So any feedback you can give us would be greatly appreciated. We've got one more seminar left in the series. I think the next slide will give you details of that. It's on the 22nd of March, and the topic being covered is Let's Talk About Relationships, Sexual Consent and Appropriate Behaviour. So please do join us if you can. And again, the session will be recorded and a link will be sent out afterwards. And then just moving on to our community on Facebook. So the link to the Parent Carer Forum is attached on this slide, and it's a great safe space for parents to ask questions, get some support and connect with other parents around the country who will no doubt be experiencing similar circumstances. So please do connect. It's a really great forum to be part of. Okay. I'd just like to thank everyone for joining us today. As I said, the link will be sent out for the session. And if you have any further questions, please do get in contact. Thank you very much.
Thanks, Jo.